Hey, what's up, Moto buddies? This is Mike from Taco Moto Co. and welcome to the weekly Moto Zoom of Doom. This is our little chat room where we talk about motorcycle stuff, moto-related things that have come up in the Facebook group and other forums where we can like have conversations about moto stuff while we're all quarantined. Some of us have been out riding, and I've seen your posts and your pictures. You guys are making it happen. Some of us are using this time to work on our bikes or to stay at home or to be with family or get other things done, and that's respectable as well. The one thing that I know that I'm missing personally is that connection with other dudes, going out and having those moto times. You know, part of the sport is enjoying the motorcycle, but then the other component is enjoying that sort of like fellowship and brotherhood with our friends, and that's what's not happening right now, and that's what this little Zoom here is trying to accomplish. So each week we try to have somebody on who's an expert or known in the field or in the industry. The last few times we've had some really good guests. And so today we've got Mark Richards on. Mark Richards is, if you don't know the name, you'll know the voice instantly when you hear it. You know his channel, Tokyo Moto. You've watched his videos because he's helped you fix your 300. He's helped you like rebuild your 300. He's helped you like work through carburetor settings and suspension settings. Mark's got videos on like tools, tool pouches. A little bit earlier, I was just sort of going through his back catalog, and there's not hundreds, but it seems like hundreds of videos, dozens, many dozens of videos. And I am not ashamed to admit this, but in my shower, okay, I am ashamed to admit this. In my shower, I have a little phone dock. It's like the suction thing, and it's attached to the wall in the shower. And I will put on some of Mark's old, they go back 6 years, some of his old helmet cam videos of like rides. And while I'm washing my butt, I will just have his video of those helmet cam ride videos on the shower wall just to pass the time. And I'm washing my ears and watching Mark ride his motorcycle in Japan, in Tokyo. And so he's been a part of my own little moto YouTube habit for a while now, and it's a total delight to have him on. I've bought some of his parts and I sell them through Taco Moto, and they do pretty well. And so Mark has a following not only in his YouTube stuff, but also his parts and the things he makes and his tools as well. And I want to get into some of that. So Mark, I thank you for doing this, and I know we're gonna, as you see here, more guys are gonna be popping up, and then I just see a couple of questions down there. So I want to start asking questions first, and the thing that I'm most curious about is, how are you a British guy living in Tokyo, and how did you get into moto?
So I moved to Japan, Tokyo, about 30 years ago. So I grew up in England and studied there, finished, and I got a electronic engineering degree and interviewed for a job with a famous audio manufacturer and got the job. They flew me out to Tokyo and I started work, as I say, just over 30 years ago.
So who was that? What manufacturer was that?
Pioneer.
Pioneer. What were you doing with them?
So I was designing audio amplifiers, which was a lot of fun. I grew up really liking audio, listening to music, and then probably when I was about 13 or 14, I started to make my own equipment, so amplifiers, speakers, and that grew into a real hobby. And I had a couple of summer jobs, vacation jobs, working for a famous loudspeaker manufacturer in their research facility. And I was helping design and develop new loudspeakers, and that was like a dream job for a teenager at that time. And that really got me thinking that, you know, I'd like to do that as a career. So I got the job with Pioneer, and the idea was that I'd originally spend 2-3 years training in Japan and then go back to Europe or the States and work in one of their facilities long term. But the transfer never happened, so I just ended up staying in Japan, and I changed jobs a couple of times and started a family, and yeah, I've been here ever since.
So, if it's not too intrusive to ask, is your wife a Japanese national, or is she British, or something else?
No, she's Japanese.
Okay, and I'm gonna guess you learned Japanese when you hit Japan. You're learning Japanese on the fly.
Right. So when I first got here, I knew pretty much zero or close to zero Japanese. So that was quite a it's like jumping off the deep end into the pool. But we were given the opportunity of intensive lessons initially. So the first couple of weeks, I think we had Japanese language lessons every day, and then that went to a couple of times a week, once a week, and after a year, the lessons stopped. But really, the most important lesson was working with other Japanese people and speaking to them on a daily basis. So I learned a lot of the technical Japanese just through working with them. It's kind of similar to motorcycle. It's difficult for someone, for example, like my wife. You talk technical talk, either electronics or motorcycle related, and she'd have no idea, even though you're talking Japanese, about it. So you really need to talk to someone that understands the technology to learn from them.
I get it. And does your wife speak any English? Have you taught her English?
She was pretty good at English. She was a airline stewardess, and she'd travel the world. So yeah, her English is pretty good.
Do you have any other British friends there, or do you feel like you've got any connection back to England?
Yeah, if you watch my ride videos, I'm always riding with some other British guys, but we're pretty international. We have guys from a lot of different countries. So.
Okay, so was Moto something you picked up in Japan, or did you bring that over with you?
No, I started riding when I was about 13. One of my friends got an old, I think it was an old Honda, and he started riding off-road. And I went along a couple of times, and he let me have a go, and I was hooked instantly. So then I bought my own bike. It was a Yamaha DT175MX. So it was one of the first bikes with a single rear shock and two-stroke bike. And I loved that. I rode that for probably 4 years or so, just off-road because I didn't have a license. So I lived in the south of England, close to the South Downs. And I used to wheel it along the road until I got to a trail where I could ride it up on some hills, and I'd be gone, all of the time I had. I'd be out there with my mate, and loved it. So yeah, I started not particularly early, but reasonably early.
Okay. So are you like crossing tires with Graham Jarvis over in England as a kid then?
No, nothing at his level, just for fun. But I loved it. Anyone that rides knows what the feeling is like, especially riding off-road. Just a real sense of freedom, especially when you're, a young teenager. It's just such a great feeling.
Yeah, I know that feeling really well. I started riding too at about the same age. My first bike was like a shed bike that somebody had given me, or I traded, and
right.
I fixed it and then just rode it until it exploded, and then have never not been into moto since. So
right. So I was the same. I had pretty much no money. Well, I had a little bit of money because I had some, jobs, mostly gardening or painting. So I used to earn a little bit of money, and most of that would go on the bike in parts or modifications to the bike. But I certainly didn't have money to pay a mechanic to fix it. So that's when I started working on my bike and picking up some skills on how to wrench on it.
Were you as creative then as you are now in terms of like coming up with solutions and then making tools and things? Have you always been that way, or is this something that you developed into?
I think I've always been pretty creative, but back then I didn't have the machinery to make my own tools. So to make tools, you really need a lathe and a mill at a minimum, and I didn't have those tools. My creativity back then was more in saving money and keeping the bike running,
Sure.
and yeah.
So,
and I did. So I used it for about 4 years, and then I sold it on, and it was still running fine.
yeah. Do you have any good hacks that you came up with as a kid trying to keep that bike going?
The main hacks were, I guess, thinking back now, I didn't really have much money for spending on fuel. So I used to siphon fuel out of my parents' cars, or they had lawnmowers and they were two-strokes as well. So if there was some two-stroke fuel for the lawnmowers, I'd use that straight away.
Okay, so I just want to throw this in perspective. While the rest of us Americans were stealing like pharmaceuticals out of grandma and grandpa's medicine cabinet, you're stealing gas. So just
my parents' cars, not other people's cars.
I just want to like contrast the American the mischievousness of an American kid and then yours. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give the win to you on this one.
Yeah, I was, I mean, even in England, a lot of kids do drugs. I was never into that. My father was a pharmacist. So he had an alarm system in his shop. And if someone broke in trying to steal drugs, the alarm was a silent alarm. It would go through to the police station. The police station would call him on the phone, and he'd go with the police and, you know, look into the shop. And typically it was a drug addict who'd broken in to get drugs. And often he'd take me with them, and you'd see the police going in with dogs. And about 10 minutes later, typically they'd come out with a fairly poor-looking guy, you know, very thin and not looking in a good state. And I got to see that, and it really put me off drugs totally. So I never got into that scene at all. And I've always been more focused on sports and getting an adrenaline rush from doing some sports. So motorcycling, as I say, the feeling you get is so intense that you remember it and just want to keep doing it and doing it. I guess it's similar to drugs, yeah. But
gosh, Mark, the more you talk about it, the more I realized I need to go to a 12-step program to get off this motorcycle addiction that I seem to be.
I think it's like that, isn't it?
So that's funny, though, that your dad was a pharmacist and you had every opportunity to steal drugs, but here you are stealing gas. So yes. I appreciate that about you. All right. So you grew up in England. You ride moto. You never raced Graham Jarvis. Did you ever meet him?
No, unfortunately not. He was due to actually come over to Japan this summer to do some training classes, and I was all set to sign up for those and meet him. But I don't think that's going to happen in the current state, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Also, Graham, this is his, I shouldn't say this, but I should. I don't think it's that. So how awesome is I have his phone number and I text him sometimes. That makes me like, woohoo, right? So I did a training with him a year and a half ago, 2 years ago in San Diego. And we kind of hit it off and we just maintained contact. And I was going to hire him. That's what you do. You basically say, Graham, I want you to come and do a training for me, and I'm going to have X number of guys. And he's like, okay, well, the tickets cost X. And so you send him the money and the plane ticket and all that, whatever. And then he comes over and does the thing. And so I had arranged to do that. And we had a date, and we had kind of set that up to do a training here in Las Vegas. And then maybe 3 months before, I got an email from him, and he's like, look, I'm going to retire. 2020 is going to be my last season, and my boss, Husqvarna, they want me to attend. He's like, you know, I typically don't attend every show and every event and everything, but now that this is my final year, they want me to do every single thing there is. And so he had to cancel me and a bunch of other ones that he had set up because he had to hunker down and fulfill his contract. And
Okay.
Now, as you know, and we all know if we follow him, he's basically got that resort, I guess, in Spain,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
basically his situation now is, instead of me going around the world and coming to you to train you, you come to me and I'll
Yeah.
train you at my little compound in Spain. And so I missed my window, and unfortunately you've missed your window, so boo-hoo to us. Maybe we'll just hook up and together we'll go to Spain and hang out with them there.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Okay, so you're a moto hooligan. You're a gas thieving, nicking hooligan in England. Nearly sent off to the Tower of London for that. And you get your job. How old were you when you got the Pioneer job? You said you were 18.
No, no, I went to university and I actually got a master's degree in electronics. So I finished that when I was, 22, 23, and came straight to Japan.
Okay, I must have thought 18 for something else. Okay, so you're in Japan. You're a young guy living in Japan. What was your first bike over there?
So my first bike here I bought in 93, and I didn't have a motorcycle license. So when I was a kid in England, as I said, I wasn't old enough to take a license. So I didn't have a license there. So I had to take my motorcycle riding license in Japan. And that was quite an experience. I actually signed up with a riding school. It cost it's quite expensive. It was about $1,000. And I think it was 12 lessons or so. And they teach you really well. It's a step-by-step process. They take you right through the basics. They have some interesting things you need to do. One is probably about a 30-foot long, I guess it's about 10 inches wide beam that you need to ride along. And you need to ride along it slowly. So you need to take more than a certain amount of time. If you do it too quickly, then you get points taken off. And this is actually part of the test. So you practice doing that sort of thing, and then braking, and they just teach you everything. So I got my license in Japan, and the first bike I got was a Honda, what is it, CRM 250, so a two-stroke road legal bike in 93. And I rode that for about 3 years, I guess. And I started getting into more off-road, and I started doing some races, and it's a really good engine back then, but it was a little bit heavy. Had things like a steel tank, and the suspension was really the worst thing about it. The forks were awful. If you did even small jumps, you'd land, and then there'd be a metal-to-metal contact, kind of clanging sound. So I tried modifying the forks, but eventually I decided I needed a more off-road focused bike. So that's when I got my first KTM. And I got a 96 KTM 250XC two-stroke. And that was just a night and day difference compared to the Honda CRM.
So you're in the land of Honda, and you get an Austrian bike. Are you taking flack over that?
No, KTMs were a respected bike in Japan, and they were actually very expensive. So what I ended up doing was importing one myself from the US. And it worked out not quite half the price, but almost half the price of purchasing one here. And it was actually a lot easier than I thought it would be. So Japan, the registration system, if you have a bike up to a 250, it's very easy to register it. There's no actual inspection of the motorcycle, it's just paperwork. But if you have a bike larger than 250, it's a full inspection. They test emissions, the brakes, everything. So yeah, 250 easy, and I imported it myself. I think back then it was 1996, and the shipping they charged me was about $500, and I was assuming it was going to come over by sea, but it actually flew over. So I got it about a week after I ordered it, really quickly. I had to go and pick it up from a warehouse and got it home, and then the fun started.
So this is a bike you order from a U.S. dealer. It comes over in a crate, and then you build it just like the dealer would when he receives it?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, no electronics on it, so now it's a little bit more challenging because you need to, certainly for four strokes, you need to hook them up to the machine to defeat the, forgotten what it's called. You know what I'm talking about, yeah?
Yeah, you got to turn them on. You got to wake them up.
Right. So there's none of that. So it was very easy.
Yeah, a CDI bike doesn't have any of that. Okay.
Right.
I appreciate the ingenuity of that, getting that bike over there. So this was a 250.
The most challenging thing was ordering it because we didn't have computers back then, or we did have computers, but there was no internet. So I didn't really use email. Everything was done by phone and fax. So I phoned up a few dealers, got some quotes, decided on one, got some faxes going, and then I had to do a bank transfer. And then, yeah, that was really back then the hardest thing to set up.
So you're using thermal paper faxes and American Express cashier's checks to buy this motorcycle. This sounds like a drug deal, Mark, again. That's very cool, dude. All right, so you get that 250, and most of your videos, I think, are on a 250. So you've continued to just get newer. What's your most current bike? Is it a 17 250?
No, my newest bike is a 2019 KTM 250 TPI.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I should mention that after the first KTM, the 96, I actually went back to Honda. So I had a series of 4 Honda CR 250s.
Okay.
And they were great bikes, very light. All of them had alloy frames. The first one I had was, what was it? Can't remember what year it is. 98, I think, was the first year of the alloy frame ones. And that was quite rigid. And then the later ones handled a lot better. But a couple of them, I registered them for road use. And I used to ride out from Tokyo to Mount Fuji and ride off-road on them all day and ride back. Quite an experience.
That's amazing. So I have 2 questions. How open and accessible is Japan for off-roading? And then where do you live in Tokyo? Describe that. Are you right in the city or what?
Well, you can maybe see my back garden here. It's a tiny little garden, but I have some bamboo in here. I live in a residential area in the southwest of Tokyo called Setagaya-ku, and it's probably the largest residential area in Tokyo. So certainly my area here is fairly nicely laid out with regular houses and apartment buildings and a lot of greenery as well. And I live very close to a major river, so I take the dog for a walk along there. So it's actually quite a nice area to live in.
Okay, very cool. And then what about Japan in general as far as being off-road, moto friendly?
So it's a mixture, really. The further you get away from the towns, the easier it is. So there isn't much off-road riding in Tokyo itself, but many, many years ago, I used to ride along the same river, and people didn't seem to care, 25 years ago or so. And there was actually a little course on an island in the middle of the river, with some jumps and stuff, and I used to ride around there, but that's long gone, and if you did that now, people would get very upset. But you don't actually have to travel that far from Tokyo. In Japan, it's very mountainous, so probably over 70% of the land area is mountainous, and with no towns on. So you can drive out of Tokyo after about 45 minutes or so. You're in the mountains, and there's just loads of trees and very rugged terrain. And there's just no shortage of places to ride off-road. You do need to be careful about which places you select to ride off-road. Public land in general is okay, and most of the public land does have trails on. And as long as you have a registered bike with a license plate on and lights, etc., you typically won't get into trouble. The areas you can get into trouble is if you're riding on private property. Yeah, so you just have to use your head. And there's also a lot of hiking trails, so you don't want to ride on the hiking trails. People don't like that. So just common sense, really, and be nice to people as well. Don't be rude. If you do meet someone, even on a regular trail, sometimes you're going to have, mountain bikes or hikers. Slow right down, say hello, be nice. And yeah, I've had very little trouble, and I've been riding, a long time here.
And then what's the race scene like out there? You participate in some races, some enduro type races. How active are the local race clubs?
Right now, not active at all, unfortunately, this year. But there's a couple of regular enduro type races. So there's the JNCC, which is the equivalent of the GNCC series. And there's a hard enduro series as well called GNet. And I've competed in, a few of the races. I'm not a good racer. I just love getting into the mountains and riding just for the feeling, and riding all day rather than riding in a race for 90 minutes, 2 hours. Racing, I think, is great if you want to increase your speed and also become more comfortable in doing more extreme things. If you're in a race, it forces you to do things which you possibly wouldn't do ordinarily. So and to go faster as well. So I think it's really good to do some racing, but for me the real enjoyment is getting out in the mountains and riding for fun. The one thing that did put me off racing was this was back when I had my 500. I was starting to really get into racing, and I did a race on a higher speed course. It was quite flat. The terrain is volcanic ash. It's quite similar to sand, actually, a little bit coarser. But much of the course was really whooped out, but still very high speed. You'd get up to maybe 120 kilometers an hour or so on some of the straights, but still whooped. Anyway, came round on the second lap. The first lap I was in first place, and then a guy overtook me, got past me, and I was like, right, I've got to get back into the lead. And I was coming out of a high-speed corner and just gave it too much. And the bike started sliding and then caught, and I high-sided. I landed on my head, did a pile driver, and I broke my back.
Oh.
And I was in the hospital for about 4 weeks. So that really got me thinking about the risks of higher speed riding and racing. And I kind of thought about what I enjoyed and came to the conclusion that, I love being in the mountains with my riding buddies, riding all day, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So I kept the 500 a bit longer, and then decided to get a two-stroke and focus more on building my technical skills, which I'm still focused on, and being able to do, steeper, more extreme terrain riding.
Yeah, that's what you seem to be doing now, and the content seems to reflect that. Do you have any videos of the 500? Did you ever make any? I don't recall ever seeing any.
Yeah, I did, but when I look back at them, I was thinking, Wow, I was really slow back then, even though I thought I was fast. I do have some videos of the couple of races I did, and I still have some video of the one I crashed in, but I didn't release that one.
Oh, so
After the crash, it's just like, oh.
yeah, so obviously helmet cam was rolling when that happened. I've got plenty of helmet cam footage of me laying there trying to catch my breath and not die, so I know that sound.
Yeah, I totally winded myself. I couldn't breathe. And initially I thought I'd just winded myself and I'm going to catch my breath, but I never caught my breath. Not for about, I guess, 3-4 hours afterwards. So it really shocked my my system and interrupted my breathing pattern. And I couldn't believe when I got to the hospital and they did you know, X-rays, etc., and they told me I've broken my back. It's like, oh no. I thought I'd maybe bruised or broken some ribs or something like that. Yeah.
Bummer, dude. Do you have any like side effects from that? Do you have any stiffness or any limitations from that?
So it's in my upper back, and you're not particularly supple there anyway, so it doesn't really affect me bending or moving. It does feel totally weird though, because they cut 2 lines down my back and then inserted 6 bolts and 2 titanium rods, and I have 3 vertebrae fused together in my upper back.
Okay.
So it's not painful. It just feels weird all the time, like it's numb, and it feels like the skin is sagging down, just due to nerve damage.
Okay. Well, anybody who races long enough is going to have pins and needles and scars and scabs. So
yeah,
all of us have some version of that story. Maybe not as severe as yours. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about when you got into developing some of these little products and tools that you got going on. What's the backstory on that?
Yeah, so I've made my own tools for quite a while, and that really started when I had my 500. So I used to overhaul my engine myself, and on certain jobs, it's not particularly easy to do with standard tools. So I already had a lathe and a mill, and I was always looking for reasons to use my lathe and mill. So the slightest excuse of being able to make a new tool for myself, I'd do that and think you know, it's kind of like a puzzle. You've maybe got a bearing to fit into something. Okay, how can I make a tool to align that bearing and make sure it presses in, you know, at right angles and cleanly? Most people are using sockets and hammers, and it's very easy to get the bearing cocked. And if you carry on driving it, if it's like a roller bearing, you damage the cage, and then the bearing is totally, you know, it's useless basically. So you need to be very careful in installing these. So I've actually got a 500 head here, and I'll try and point my computer down to it. Hopefully it won't cut out. I think, oh, it's cut out. I'm still here. You can see the engine, yeah?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, so the head is here. So this is where the cam sits in here, and it's got 2 roller bearings. So there's a small one here and quite a large one here. And if you're replacing these, it's actually quite difficult to drive these in straight, particularly this larger one. So that got me thinking about making a tool. So this is the tool I came up with. So it's 3 pieces. And this part, for installing the small bearing first, you don't have the large bearing and you've already taken that out. You install this ring in here, which centers this press pin, and you put the bearing on here, and then you can drive it in straight. Once this is installed, then you can put this into the small bearing, which centers this tool. So you put the large roller bearing on there, and then you can drive it in straight. So this is one of actually the first tools I came up with just to install these bearings. And they're quite difficult to, you know, as I say, quite difficult to install. And if you do mess it up, if you get this one canted, it really becomes useless because you damage the cage and then the roller bearings won't be smooth on it. And another tool I made for the head, overhauling the head, is this really simple tool. And this is for the Vow Seal installation. So it's just a bit of rod with holes drilled and finished. And it's got two different sizes, one for the intake valves and one for the exhaust. And then with the springs off, you put it over there and then drive in your valve seals nice and straight. So yeah, that's just a couple of examples of tools I made for my 4-strokes. I never decided to sell these. And then I think the next one I made was wheel bearing press tool. So this I do sell now. So I've got one here, and very simple tool. This is the base. So you'd use it with it standing on your bench. You put your wheel on, and this part aligns it, and then you put your bearing on, and then this is the press plate. So KTM off-road bike bearings, the outer diameter is the same on both the front and rear wheel, and then the inner part of the bearing, the size is different on front and rear. So this part is machined for a front wheel bearing, and this part is for a rear wheel bearing. Just put this on, and then using the nuts, you press it in, and it goes in dead straight. Very easy to do. If you didn't have this tool, you can still do it with a socket and hammer, but it's very, very easy to get the bearing canted. And one reason I decided to make this was one time one of my friends was around my garage wanting to replace his bearings, and I was kind of talking him through the process. I'm going to revert back to me, and it's for some reason when I adjust my laptop screen, the video cuts out. But yeah, one of my friends was round wanting to install some bearings in his wheels, and I was talking him through the process, showing him how to do it, and he got to pressing in the bearing. So then I didn't have the wheel bearing press tool. So he was using a socket and a hammer, and I was saying, yeah, you need to tap it in fairly fast, because I'll put the bearing in a freezer to shrink the size, and I'd heated up the hub. So I'm saying, do it fairly fast so the bearing doesn't heat up. And he was doing it really slowly. I said, no, you've got to do it faster. And then he started doing it faster and whacked one side, and the bearing just got totally canted. And it wasn't pretty. So I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. So got me thinking. I made the bearing press tool. The next bearing wheel change I did use the tool, and it works so well. It's just night and day difference. Presses in, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're not going to mess up the wheel bearings.
I like that tool, Mark. I've got mine right here, and I use it, and I'm a fan. I also have one of your little oil change kits. Why don't you walk us through that? Tell us about this little guy.
So that one, so starting with the 2017 model KTM 2-strokes, the oil drain is buried away quite far underneath the engine. So when you come to drain the old oil, it comes out, even though the access to the drain bolt is from the side, the oil just pours out underneath and goes all over your skid plate. So if you don't want to make a big mess, you end up having to take your skid plate off. And depending on what skid plate you have, the 6 days as standard, they come with a quick release skid plate, which is very handy for oil changes, but then not particularly strong or well made. And I used one for a while. and it ended up just flopping down. You'd go over a log or something, it would release itself. So if you use like a bolt-on one with fasteners which go over the frame, much better design, but a real pain to take off for oil changes. So it got me thinking, if I had a long tool to screw in there to divert the oil away from the bottom of the engine into a tube, oil changes would be so much easier. So yeah, that's the tool I came up with about, what, 3 years ago now. And that's the first tool I started selling. And it's quite popular, and there's quite a few copies now as well.
Yes, yes. I was just going to commend you on that. Now you would claim, and I think you should, that you sort of developed that concept and were probably first to market with that.
I didn't really develop the concept of a drain tool. There's, there've been simple drain tools available for a long time, but not specifically for the 2017 plus models. So the one I made was, I think, the first long tool, which really made it easy to change the oil on those 2017 plus models.
Gotcha. Well, not to throw any shade on any of the other guys that are out there making these, but there's a number of copycats that are basically, for all intents and purposes, complete clones of what you've got going on.
I found them. I'm on the TPI Facebook forum, and someone posted about oil change tools, and someone posted a link to an eBay oil drain tool. And I had a look at that, and the tool itself is actually, reasonably made. I don't know what materials it's made of, but kind of looks okay. But he'd used like 2 of my photos, just taken from my website. So there was my bike on its side with my drain tool in it. And I contacted the guy and said, hey, I haven't given you my permission to use my photos. Can you please remove them? And he replied back saying, you're mistaken.
Clearly,
I said, no, I'm not mistaken. That is my bike. It's got a TM design skid plate on it. It's got scratches in these places. It's got these foot pegs. This is my bike. And he said, no, you're mistaken. The bikes, they all look alike. But about an hour later, he'd modified the photos in Photoshop or something. Another thing was, in my garage, I have a rubber mat which has circles on it. He'd changed the circles to like star-shaped things. It's like, why are you going to all this trouble? Just take your own photo. I don't have a copyright or a patent or anything on these, but if people can't be bothered to take their own photos, it's like,
Yeah. So what are you doing as far as manufacturing? Are you turning these things out by hand, one at a time in your private garage?
Yes, I do. I still hand make them. That's kind of one thing I well, not necessarily pride myself on, but that's part of my business model right now. I'm still at a volume where I can make the tools myself. I hand select the materials. So for majority of my tools, I use 6061 billet aluminium, and I machine everything on myself. It's mostly lathe work, and I do everything by hand. Very manual process. It takes quite a long time to make a tool, and that's one reason that my pricing is, I wouldn't say expensive, but if you compare it to a lot of stuff on eBay, yes, it's more expensive. But that's one reason I can't make it extremely cheaply. But who knows what materials you're getting if you buy something off eBay from China? No idea. It might look nice and it might have a nice orange finish on it, but you go to use it, snaps or something like that. Yeah. So I definitely don't want to outsource my production to China. I'd have no control of quality or materials used.
Yeah, well, everything I've ever got from you, Mark, is just, it's like a work of art. I kind of just like holding it in my hand because it's so well made. The machine marks, are so nice and accurate. You're a true craftsman, and it's nice to see the work, the handwork of somebody who takes that much care for something as simple as like a bearing press tool. I know, and what you say is true. I know I can find these all day long on eBay for a quarter of the cost, but I don't want that tool. I want this one. I want the one that you made. I want the one that's got your fingerprints on it and also has a backstory of you being in Japan, and just the whole narrative of what you're about, to me, represents value, and it makes it worth the price proposition. Like, I don't mind paying multiple times over for something. So for example, like, I have a lot of motion tools in my bag. I know Chris at Motion Pro is what I meant.
I do too.
Okay, right. And so we both know, and all of us in Moto know, that there are Chinese knockoff version of almost everything Motion Pro. It seems like every time Motion Pro comes out with something new and innovative, just wait a month, and then you're going to find something on eBay that's like a one-to-one exact ripoff of that for a quarter of the cost, and I'm never going to buy those. I'm always only going to buy the Motion Pro version and run the Motion Pro version. And in fact, to your credit, I saw in a video where you had to take off the crankshaft bolt, and you use that great little Motion Pro. Here, I got one right here. You use one of these little guys, a cam gear block, and that made me appreciate you even more. So a quality tool, in my opinion, is as important as a quality motorcycle or a quality anything else. I'll skimp on other stuff, but I tend to not skimp on a tool.
No, particularly if you're going to use it for a long time. If it's a one-off type tool, then I might skimp. If I know for certain I'm only going to use it once. But other than that, if I know I'm going to use it 2-3 times or use it regularly, I'll definitely spend the money, and then you've just got it for the rest of your life, basically.
So how many parts do you have on your website? Now, I noticed that you're also selling like RK heads and a few other things that you're not making, you're just reselling. So how much of your business is what you make, and how much of it is reselling as a dealer?
It's probably half right now. So I sell the Arcatech heads, I sell stick carburetors, and I sell some Dal Sogyo fork inserts, a revalve kit as well. So probably 50-50, but it depends on the time. Recently, I'm selling a lot more of my tools. I think people are staying at home in their garages wanting to work on their bikes. I'm selling a lot of the tools and parts I make right now. Yeah.
Do you see yourself going down the road of becoming like a parts seller or an installer? Like, do you see a retirement in the business you're in now, in your industry, and then going into Moto?
I think definitely when I retire, this is something I like to continue. I do like making the tools. I love developing a new tool. So having a problem to solve, like I talked about with the 4-stroke head. So solving that sort of puzzle, developing a new tool is really what I enjoy most. But making the tools is fun as well. And definitely something I'd like to continue. I don't see myself giving that up anytime soon, for sure.
Can you let us in on any developments? What are you working on?
So the last product I released was, call it the BLS capacitor. So batteryless starter capacitor. It can be used in TPI bikes or 4-stroke bikes, which don't have a capacitor fitted standard, and it allows the bike to be started and run even if the bike's battery is totally dead. So you can either bump start the bike if it doesn't have a Kickstarter, or kickstart it if it does have a Kickstarter. And it might not seem that important, but if you're in the middle of nowhere and for some reason if your battery goes dead, you're basically you've got no way of getting the bike running if you don't have a capacitor in it. So I think for a lot of people it's an important product, and it's pretty easy to make one yourself, to source a suitable capacitor, solder on some connections. But I'm basically just offering a service for something that's plug and play. And yeah, seems to be quite popular. I've got a couple of ideas for new products as well. One I've just developed is a drain tool for Sherco two-strokes. A few customers have asked me for those, so I maybe right now I'm just making them to order, so I might release that on the website soon.
I like it. So in fact, your capacitor is something that Kyle Brotherson featured on his dirt bike channel not long ago.
Yeah.
Did he let you know that he was gonna, you know, drop you a large on that, like make a big? I mean, that's huge. He's got 100,000, you know, subscribers. So whenever he mentions anybody for anything, that's a lot of eyeballs.
Yeah. So he actually just ordered 2 of them from me without saying anything. So the Tokyo Offroad business, I do everything myself. So, you know, I develop the parts, I make the parts, I package them and ship them. So I know exactly who's ordering what, where it's going. And I saw his name on the order. I thought, oh, it's Carl. So I sent it off, and I sent him an email as well. And he replied back and said, yeah, I'm really interested in this. Maybe I can make a video about it. And so he did some testing. It went really well. And he said, yeah, I'm going to make a video. It's going to be released on this date, which is what he did. So yeah, that created quite a bit of interest and, you know, lots of questions, etc.
Probably so much so that you had to make that second video, which was more of like a Q&A type thing. The first one was good on the product, maybe not on some of the, you know, you didn't know what you didn't know at the time, probably, that you would be bombarded with all of the many minutia, the many nitty-gritty nuts and bolts questions. And so the second video is probably a reaction of like answering emails and questions.
Yes. To kind of reduce some of the questions, but also to provide clarity in what the product does and what it doesn't. So what I didn't know at the time, in Japan, the KTM bikes are widely available, but they don't import all the models. So for example, the two-stroke XC model is not imported into Japan. We have the EXC model, which is pretty much the same as the XCW. So I'd never seen a XC, I'd never ridden one, and I'd never really looked into what it does and doesn't do. But actually one of Carl's friends, he had an XC and was testing it, and found out that from the factory it comes fitted with a capacitor. So it doesn't actually need the BLS capacitor. But the XCW does. So that's something I learned and didn't know when I first developed the product. So it's very important to get customer feedback, because I can't, you know, purchase all of the bikes. I can't be aware of everything. So I really appreciate that feedback as well. And as soon as I get that information, I want to be able to push it out to, you know, all of you guys via YouTube or the website product listing. I definitely don't want customers to be surprised or disappointed about my products. So I'm very upfront in what things can and can't do.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think that people appreciate about you is you come at this with an engineer's perspective, and engineers are kind of no BS kind of guys, because, you know, sometimes there are lives at stake, if not, you know, product and reputation and big manufacturing money. And so an engineer typically is one of the more honest people in any industry.
I will definitely not lie about something, and I definitely want everything to be very reliable and high quality. And I'm really, really not out there to just get money off people and provide a poor product. That's not my business model at all. All of the tools I've made and products I've made, things that I've seen a need for and something I wanted myself to use. And I'd never planned anything just to make money. That's not my business model at all. And the other products I make, which I don't make myself, All of them I've used myself and liked them and thought it could be of benefit to other people, and maybe not widely available outside of the US. So that's the reason I started reselling some of the other products as well.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. You know, that's my philosophy too on my own little parts store, Tokyo Moto Co. Everything that I sell is something that I've taken to Baja and it didn't break the first time. Now, it might break. Everything breaks eventually. Everything can be worn out. But it wasn't something that broke the first time. It broke the 30th time, and I put my seal of approval on it. And so I don't sell things that would make me a better price point, make me a better margin, because I'm not going to put it on my bike. I don't run it, and I don't want it. I don't want it on your bike because I don't want your phone call to me after I sold you this thing, and then you're stranded. I don't want that. You don't want it either. So I'm tracking with you 100%.
Yeah. So I do have a funny story about oil drain tools. So I've only ever had 2 drain tools reported broken, and both were exactly the same failure. So
they were riding with them, did they?
What's that?
Did they go riding with them on the bike?
Very close, yeah. Not actual ride. They didn't get as far as riding it, but they did get as far as putting it into gear.
And the gear shift lever came down on
it. Yeah. So with the long drain tool installed in the oil drain, they started the engine and tried to put it into gear. Why would you do that? So stamped down on the shifter and snapped the threaded part of the drain tool off. Only 2 cases, and I've sold a lot of those drain tools. So I'm 100% certain they can't be broken in normal use. But after I heard of those 2 cases, I put a warning, you know, at the top of the product listing: do not operate the motorcycle with a drain tool installed.
So looking at the question, there was a question here from Mitch. Mitch says, the BLS capacitor, is it needed on KTM for strokes?
So yeah, I'm not, I don't know all of the models which have a capacitor fitted. I know the XCF model and the Husqvarna FX. I think they have a capacitor fitted, but I'm not sure how far back that goes. So the late models, I think they do have a capacitor fitted. But models like the XEWF, the EXCF, they do not have a capacitor. So even if you try and bump start it, it will not start and run.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of experience with that as far as the plated bikes. So none of the street legal plated bikes have a start capacitor. So that would be the EXC, even the new 20 plus XCFW, and then the FE. Those are like the off-road version of the 20 plus EXC and FES bikes. They do not have a start capacitor.
Yeah.
So nothing that could have a plate does, but the SXF does, the XFW does. So it would be needed. And just Mark, can you explain why you need to have this thing if your battery is below a certain voltage threshold, or if your battery completely fails outright? Like what does this capacitor do? Why do you even need to have this thing?
Right. So the capacitor basically smooths out the voltage coming from the stator. Without it, if you look at the voltage on an oscilloscope, it's very, irregular, and it's not stable enough to run the ECU and the fuel injection system. So adding the capacitor in there, and it goes between ground and the plus voltage, smooths that voltage out enough to allow the ECU and fuel injection system to work. And ordinarily, if you've got a battery in there which is functioning properly, it actually does a similar role. So, yeah, it's only when that
it sort of acts as like a dampener or
Yeah,
like a hydraulic damper, because a lot of times you'll have that hydraulic backrush on water systems, and so you put in that canister, and that canister acts as like a shock absorber. Well, that
right,
water pulse pressure, what you're saying is the capacitor acts as if it's sort of like a damper, a shock absorber for these voltage
right,
pulses that otherwise are incompatible with kick-starting or bump starting a bike with a dead battery.
correct. So I did quite a bit of testing on my TPI, and I found that with the battery disconnected and no capacitor, the bike would most often it wouldn't do anything. It just would not start. But occasionally it would fire up, but only for like 1 or 2 engine cycles and then die straight away. So yeah, the root cause is the voltage is not stable enough without the capacitor or a functioning battery.
Yeah, well, Kyle did you a huge favor because he basically demonstrated that, and that's
Right.
great. It's a great video. I mean, it's very funny, and watching him, sweat as he tries to push start that bike down his street is hilarious. But like,
Yeah.
that's the best product video demonstration I've seen almost on anything. And so, what a great, favor to you, right? That's huge.
Yeah. But ultimately, it's for all of the riders out there who are taking their bikes into the, wilderness, miles and miles from anywhere. If you do have a battery failure, or if your battery voltage drains right down for some reason, you'd be stranded without this. So, yeah.
So I recommend to guys to put that on and leave it on. Just throw it across the positive and negative terminals, zip tie it away out of the airbox somewhere, leave it on
Yeah.
your bike. It's just becomes a part of your system, just like it is on the SXF and XCF bikes. Those bikes have a battery and they have that starting capacitor, both in series all the time, full time.
Yep.
It's a
It's
packaging issue.
in parallel. The capacitor goes in parallel to the battery.
Thank you for the correction. Yes, it is in parallel. So they must. I'm being corrected by an electrical engineer, which I appreciate. So it must be a packaging issue. There's just not a whole lot of room on a EXC bike by the time they've added everything in there to make it an EXC. Not a lot of real estate left over to put in. And if you've seen these on the XCF bikes, they're like a mini Red Bull can. They're a good 3 inches in diameter and 3 inches long, and so that's a bit of real estate that I don't think it's a packaging issue. But yours are very small and tidy and can be tucked away and left on full time. So do you recommend that as well?
It fits nicely into the airbox. On the 18, 19 model TPIs, there's a really nice little spot where it can be mounted, and in one of my videos I show zip tying the capacitor body in place. I do recommend that you don't just have the capacitor dangling by the wire and being able to swing around. Eventually, the wires are going to fail if you do that. So you really want to hold the capacitor body to something else. It could be, you could zip tie it or tape it to some other wiring, or to the frame or anything, but you want to be able to hold the capacitor in place so it's not being suspended by the wire. I should mention that for kick-starting, my testing was pretty varied. Sometimes I could start the bike up fairly easily. Others I could not get the bike to start. It would seem to load up and not start. So as an option, if you look at the website, I offer what I'm calling a pre-charge harness, which allows you to connect a 9-volt battery, and that pre-charges the capacitor up to 9 volts, 10 volts, whatever the battery voltage is, and allows you to kickstart the bike first kick or second kick. And then kickstarting becomes very reliable and easy to do. So if you have a Kickstarter, then recommend getting the pre-charge harness as well. It's about $6 more.
Yeah, nice upsell. I like that. You want some fries and a belt with that purchase, sir?
But depending on your thinking and where you're riding, if you're in a hilly area, it's probably pretty easy to do a hill start, and a lot of people would just ride back to their trucks and call it a day if their batteries completely failed. and just having a capacitor in place will allow you to get your bike started. Actually, even if you're on flat ground, if you've got your capacitor, you can get one of your buddies to give you a tow and get the bike started. So I think at a minimum, it's a really good idea to fit the capacitor to get yourself out of trouble.
Yeah, I'm only going to recommend the one with the battery option. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to not have the battery option. I think it's smart, and the ones I'm going to start selling of yours, I'm just going to get the ones with the battery option as well. What do you think about guys who throw a double battery into their two-strokes? So they'll take and they'll run two 12-volt batteries so that when they are at crank mode, they've got it wired so that they're running 24 volts to the starter, and then in run mode, they're charging just to 12 volts. Have you heard of that mod, and what do you think of it?
Yes, I have. I would be concerned about the reliability, the 24 volts on the starter motor, and how long that's going to last for. I think it really depends on, you know, how many starts you're doing, but it would definitely reduce the lifetime of the starter motor and make it more susceptible to burning out. That would be my concern. With my 2017 250, it's done, what, 430 hours, just over now. And I'm still using my original starter motor, and it still functions perfectly. The biggest issue I've seen on starting systems on the two-strokes is the bushings used in the starter motor. And the original bushings are quite soft, and they have a red coating which wears quite quickly. And the design of the bushing is split as well, and it means the size can change very easily. And you often find the bushings spin in the engine casings. And once they start spinning and moving, then the engine case housing where the bush sits starts opening up. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. As the movement increases, the force gets more, and eventually you crack your engine case. The starter system doesn't work, it jams. If you don't do anything about it, try and use it, then you burn your starter motor out because the Bendix can't turn. So you end up having to get a new Bendix, a new starter motor, new bushings, and possibly new engine cases. It can turn into a nightmare in parts costs. So keeping on top of your starter system, and I think it's a good idea to replace the bushings. If you can stay with the KTM OEM bushings, but you do need to replace them fairly often to keep them in good conditions. Or I sell a bronze bushing kit made by XRC, which is a company in New Zealand, and they make some really nicely made bronze bushings with a little install punch, and I sell those in kits for different year models. I sell a 4-bush kit, 2-bush kit, and for the newer TPIs, they actually come standard with a longer length, deeper bushing, and I sell those as well. And if you install those, they typically last a lifetime of the bike. So you'll have a lot fewer starter issues.
Okay, so Mark, I think we're kind of in like the home stretch here, just of time for this chat. I want to talk about your videos. Oh, let me see if there's any other questions. Hang on. Let's see. Can Mark talk about why he chooses to run a steering damper for the type of riding he does? Awesome chat. Mark is a true Renaissance man. Yes, he is. So Mark, why do you run a damper?
I've used a damper for a long time, and it's one of those things you get used to. A lot of my riding is low speed, and a damper really doesn't play that much of an important role. But any ride, there's some high speed bits. Approaches to hill climbs are often higher speed, and it can be very rocky. The rocks fall down to the bottom, so you get a cluster of rocks, and you're trying to accelerate, go fast through these rocks. And if you hit one wrong, it can really you know, throw the bars out. And having a steering damper helps track through that, and roots as well. You hit a root wrong, it can really flick the handlebars. So having a damper allows me to relax a lot more. Most of my rides are all-day rides, and we tend to not really ride at relaxed trail speeds, more kind of faster, slightly competitive. Yeah, I enjoy using the steering damper. On my TPI, I don't actually have one mounted. I can still ride that fine, but I do notice it's not really nervous, but every so often you'll get a whoa and have to, you know, really hang on and correct it. So I guess a lot is personal preference. I know some people don't like them at all. I have my low speed damping fairly weak, and a higher speed damping is dulled up a bit more. So that allows me to ride fairly normally at, you know, low speeds in technical riding. And then if I do hit something, it'll damp out that movement.
So if you're changing low and high speeds, do you have a Scots or a Pro Moto billet?
I have a Scots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about a damper? And I like that we are saying it correctly, damper and not dampener.
I know, as I say, I think if you do have a damper and get used to it, it allows you to ride more relaxed and save energy. You're not giving the bars the death grip just to keep it going straight, and you're not worried about you're not worried so much about how it's going to track through rocks or roots or whatever. I certainly don't think they're essential, but a lot of it is personal preference, what you get used to, and yeah, it's like a lot of things, you know. Some people love using recluse clutches, others hate them. Yeah, it's that type of thing. I can ride without a steering damper as well. As I say, my TPI doesn't have one on. And it does feel...
What do you think about a poor man's damper where you just preload the steering stem bearings, you know, a couple extra pounds?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Okay. Let's see. We had one other question, couple more maybe here.
I saw one saying if they hooked up 2 batteries in parallel instead of in series, they would have more cranking amps at 12 volts.
Yes.
Yeah,
so the real idea behind that mod is to get 24 volts to the starter, because the problem is that the starter doesn't have enough life left in it, and so it's like supercharging the starter with that 24 volts to push it to overclock it and get it started.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what bike you have, but if you think about when the bike is new, when it was brand new, did it start okay? And if the answer is yes, then really something else has caused an issue and creating a larger load on the starter motor. And most often the first thing that goes wrong, like I talked about, was the Bendix bushings. They start going bad. The Bendix can move out of alignment and create more load on the starter motor. And that's when you start thinking, you know, oh, I need a high voltage or whatever. If you keep your starter system in, you know, good condition, I think that issue pretty much goes away.
Okay, now we've got another question here. Okay, so Pete left. Goodbye. Thanks for hanging in there, Pete, with us. Thanks for awesome products, Mark. Thanks for hosting. Hope to Zoom with you guys again later. Cheers. Thank you, Pete, for that. This is from Ken. Tubes, bibs, tubeless. Curious what you use, Mark.
I use a heavy tube in the front tire and a tubeless in the rear tire. And I run the tubeless rear at super low pressure. So this obviously depends on what tire you use, but I use Shinko gummy tires, and they have quite a thick sidewall and a softer crown, and they're ideal for using tubeless at low pressure. So I run about 2 psi typically in the rear tire. And that allows the tire to flatten off and provide fantastic grip and traction. But in the front, I run about 11 psi on a fatty size tire, a 90-100.
And then what tire are you liking up front?
Recently, I've been using the Shinko 546. That lasts really well. Works well in all conditions. I don't change my tires depending on their conditions, certainly not the front. I tend to use the front tire for a long time. I've still got a 546, which I've probably used for about 20 days of riding now. It's getting a bit tired, but there's no sidewall knob tears, so that's working really well. For a while, I used tubeless in the front as well. But for me, I don't really see the benefit so much compared to a heavy tube. I get very few front punctures. If you get a lot of punctures, then maybe tubeless is a good system. It's very easy to plug, but I get maybe one puncture a year or less in the front. So that's not really a huge advantage for me. And I'm not running low pressures in the front either. So a heavy tube for me works pretty well.
What tube are you using, and do you also use sealant in your tubes?
I use a IRC heavy tube. I haven't really looked into different tubes available. This is, when I purchased mine at IRC, is widely available in Japan, and that's what I ended up using. It's not a super heavy tube. As I say, the riding I do a fair mixture, but I don't have anything like cactus or anything like that. And I know for you guys in the States, riding in the desert, that can be an issue, and that's probably one reason you run sealant as well. So I do not use sealant. Okay,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about, this is not something that somebody asked, but you and I were messaging earlier about those wheel bearings. Are you a fan of the SKF stuff?
Oh yeah, I love SKF. High quality bearings. I love the seals as well. Work really well. Much better than the stock seals. So highly recommend using those.
I agree there as well. Another question, Anthony asks, have you tested the stiction? I think he's asking about stiction on the 36 millimeter PWK. I think he's asking about a fork there. No,
he's talking about carburetor, 36 millimeter PWK cane, and I tested it using a stick metering block. I personally, I run a 38 millimeter PWK with a stick. The advantage in stock form of the 36 is the bottom end is better. And then there's a trade-off going through the mid to the top, so the 38 is better from mid on up. If you fit a stick into a 38, you end up getting a great bottom end, and it just pulls right the way through. So the bottom end would be similar with a stick on the 36 and 38, and then mid and up, the 38 is much better. So there's really no advantage to using a 36 millimeter carburetor with a stick system. So anyone, whether riding a 125 up to a 300, I always recommend using a 38. If you've only got a 36 and want to try a stick, yes, sure, you can do that, and it'll be an improvement over the stock carburetor, but really you get the full benefit of using a 38 millimeter carburetor.
Mark, that makes me wonder, how many calls and emails are you getting from guys who just want tech support? Are you happy to get those calls, and do you get many of them?
Absolutely. I don't get a huge number. It depends if I've released a video about something new, or it might be a controversial subject. There's a surge in mails and calls, etc. But ordinarily I get a couple of technical questions a day probably. And I'm happy to help out. Often it's not about my products, it might be general questions. I've had a few of those today.
Thank you for being an asset to the Moto community, my man. What's a controversial video?
What's controversial? So tires. Everyone has their favorite tire. Really depends on what riding you do, on what's a good tire for you. So I can only comment about things that I enjoy using. Another good example is recluse clutches.
Okay. Do one on oil if you really want to waste a lot of time answering questions and emails.
Right. What oil do you use?
Yeah. Rotella. Okay. I want to kind of finish up. Here's a question. We just one popped in. What is a good rule of thumb for a rich condition versus lean condition as far as the sound difference? That's a good question.
Yeah, so the sound will be very different. If you're running rich, it'll be a kind of gurgling sound when you try and open it up. It won't pull cleanly. The lean will sound totally different. It's difficult to explain, but very easy to feel if you're riding. Yeah, it comes with experience.
Yeah, is that something you have a video on, or could you put that on your shot list?
I don't really. Yeah, that would be a good video actually. I could possibly set a carburetor up so it's running rich or lean, and then take a ride video.
Yeah, okay, we'll put that on your short list. Oh, what about pipe bang? Tell us about that.
So pipe bang is very common with two strokes. It doesn't really affect performance as such. It can be annoying if it's extreme. My bikes have a little bit of pipe bang. It's not something I really worry about. If you try and tune it out, typically you end up with an engine that doesn't really perform that well, but might not actually pipe bang. So I wouldn't really, totally focus on the pipe bang. Focus more on how the bike feels when it's under load and pulling.
Okay. And then what if we just kind of wrap up with, Will, do we have another question? You're bringing it, Mark. You're getting all the questions. Okay. Oh, okay. Ryan just says, thanks, Mark, and the group. This has been very informative. Thank you, Ryan, for being here. Okay. I would like to know, as we wrap up, how did you get into making videos? You're very productive. It seems like you're putting out, I don't know, for sure, like it seems like one a month, sometimes a little more. You've got stuff as intricate as like engine rebuilds, and then sometimes you're just talking about a wrench. So
right.
When did you get into making these videos?
So what started me making the maintenance videos is one of my riding buddies. He just got into dirt biking and had very limited knowledge about maintenance. And I'd always explain how to do stuff, like an oil change and stuff like that. And he doesn't live close by. He lives like 300 kilometers away. So it was always he'd video chat me or whatever, asking me how to do something. So I said, oh, okay, I'll make a video about this. And so that's when I started making the videos. And yeah, generated quite a bit of interest. So as people were leaving, comments, etc., that encouraged me to make more videos. But I should mention that recently I've been a bit slack in making videos, so I'm aware of that. And I typically have a goal of making one video a week, be it a maintenance video or ride video. Recently with the coronavirus, that's been quite challenging, going riding, etc. So I haven't been doing that. And I've also been pretty busy making tools, etc. There's been more demand than normal, so I'm spending a lot of time making and shipping tools worldwide.
You've got one video that's got like 1,000,003 views, so some of these have done pretty well. Are you getting a YouTube check for this?
What's that?
Are you able to like get any revenue off these? Those are high numbers.
I do, but the revenue you get from videos on YouTube is not that fantastic. If you're getting a million views, then it's quite reasonable. But you know, majority of my videos get a few thousand views, which is still significant. But from a revenue perspective, it's virtually nothing.
Yeah, there's like some dancing duck video I was looking at the other day. It has like a trillion gajillion views. That's where the money is, man. Making videos for toddlers.
Although it does depend on the video type. So if you're posting content which not necessarily copied but not your own, the revenue you get from that type of video is a lot lower than something educational.
Interesting. Okay. Mark, what should we know about you so that in the future when we watch the next video, we'll have a little bit better perspective on you as the rider and instructor. Give us kind of a summary of what you I think there's a lot that's special about you, but give me a summary of what you think is unique and special about what you have going on.
I don't know whether it's particularly unique or special. Really, the reason I'm doing this is I love getting out riding in the mountains. That's where the passion comes from, the feeling. I actually, you know, every time I go riding, I just love it. It still feels like I'm a teenager riding the bike, and it's just such a special feeling. And that feeling drives me to make videos and make tools, etc., and kind of share some of the knowledge I have with others so they can have a similar passion and enjoyment of riding. If people get something out of that and enjoy it and can carry on doing that, that makes me happy as well. So, yeah.
All right, my man. Well, it's been a delight to do this with you. I don't see that there's any other questions. Pablo over here, lounging in Mexico, says, thanks, guys. I really appreciate your quality and personal approach to what both of you guys do. Thank you, Pablo. Mark, it's been great. Thank you guys for participating. Obviously, this was the live event, and now we'll post this up on YouTube. And so if you've got any questions, further questions, you'd like to ask Mark, you can post those in the YouTube comments, and then we'll try to do our best to get you an answer, or you can contact Mark directly. Use his website. Is it TokyoOffroad.com?
Yes, that's right.
And I bet you people can find you through an email link there, and there's a way to communicate with you directly through there.
Yeah, there's a contact page, and you can send an email through that, and I typically get back pretty quickly, depending on the time.
Yep. And there's also your YouTube channel as well, and you can leave comments there. So, Mark, you're the best. Thank you, everybody. Happy coronavirus.
Thanks a lot for having me on here. It's been good fun.
Okay. See you guys. See you all next week. Ciao.
Thanks. Bye.